Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Mr.Within episode. Tonight's episode is going to focus on a very interesting viewpoint upon this existence. And so I want to really look into language and, in some sense, I guess, share my view on its role in the evolution of nature. I got to start off like this, that I wrote a book titled An Evolutionary Return in Nature. And in this book, I spoke about some sort of new paradigm of thought that is going to emerge, where human beings are going to notice the technological realm is it's moving beyond their control. Pretty much, the human being is not just finding itself alive in a world; it's finding itself in various systems and various technologies, you can say. One of these technologies I consider to be language. I consider language to be an inner technology because it is used. Do you see? Your consciousness uses the subjective aspect of your moment to identify the objective. You see, we can say external technology. We have, SpaceX is on the frontier of, launching rockets into Mars and whatnot. But when we consider language as an inner technology, it means we are not the language we speak of. So in some sense, there is a disengagement with the linguistic simulation, with how the world is alive through words. When this occurs, it's as if the chain around the neck of mankind, the technological chain around the neck of mankind, opens up. We see a lot of our behaviors are orchestrated due to how our thoughts are orchestrated, how our thoughts are in motion. Ludwig Wittgenstein, this German philosopher, says the limits of my language are the limits of my world. We have another kind of Sufi mystic poet by the name of Hafez, where he says the words you speak become the house you live in. We even look at the kind of roots and the source of magic, and we in some sense find spelling, we find words. So at some point in the evolutionary scheme of things, human beings kind of evolved into their own kind of private rooms of language. In their moment, words could be orchestrated and structured. You see, the human being, I can't just change my whole body right now just by thinking about it, but I can change my mind. I can change how my attention in some sense engages the conceptual, the abstract. So it all has to do, whenever we want to explore into the mind, we are in some sense trying to, I guess, how would I say it? It's like we're looking at a phenomena where it includes memory and imagination. If you pay attention, because the future hasn't happened, any future idea is something that is imagined. Because the past has happened, we say it is past, therefore we say it's a memory. So the line between what is a memory and what is in some sense imagination is how the subjective data in some sense aligns with the objective data. I tend to explain it like this in these talks, that imagine the unconscious movement of manifestation in nature. In some sense, we see nature, just natural phenomena occurring, kind of like, I guess scientifically, it's like before any entity or creature has been made. We see the motion of the kind of like unconscious movement. Suddenly, when this creature evolves to a point where it can acknowledge itself individual and separate from the world, there occurs a subjective evolution. So not only this ape stood up on its two legs, the objective evolution. Okay, let me shape it like this. It's as if we saw the body is separate from the world. So suddenly, it was then possible for the idea of us to be like a man in a world, a person in a world. It took us 4 billion years to become people, believe it or not. And so the evolutionary return to nature is a suggestion that language is at its critical point in society right now. When you look at the news, when you look at kind of what the Western audience, its mind is engaging, we see in regards to issues of political correctness, freedom of speech, what is okay, what is not okay, what is valid, what is invalid, we find all this. The issue is that we feel we are all, not we are all, but we are in just one way when the world is changing in many ways. You know, there's a saying, sometimes you can't know the future because you have to build it. So we contain objectivity in subjectivity. And what contains subjectivity, I personally consider, is an attributeless attention. That means that's one thing we creatures that are bound to language, it's very hard for us to acknowledge that we are beyond the definitions. Language was, it has a very important position for me. You don't understand how important language is. Because for me, I wondered what is progress for the body? It is to build the world. What is progress for the mind? And that's the question. How should we live where greater dimensions of our experience are kind of engaged within this existence? Think of it this way. Imagine, like, by the age of 11, I had comprehended religious concepts and I had comprehended metaphysical concepts. Not as thoroughly as now, but my mind had engaged with the possibilities. As it has engaged with the possibilities, it had created new relationships. So you see, a child has a powerful imagination because it doesn't know anything about reality yet. When it sees how reality takes shape, takes form, how it moves, how attention functions the world, in some sense, the child has to make a decision, and these decisions end up being the solid aspect of the being. I sometimes speak of it this way: see three dimensions to the person. There's like as if the person is some sort of unique substance, and there's a kind of solid state, liquid state, and a gas state. Now imagine these three states simultaneously present, as if a sort of dimension of your existence, everything is in a sort of particular motion, particular movement. It's like, and in a different state, it is more fluid, as if it's like there's a state that's just fully objective reality. Then there's a state where it's kind of like liquid. And what I mean by that, it's kind of like a mixture of imagination and reality. Think of it as a semi conscious state. And then there's the gas state, where it is unknown. As if we could see the ice, we could see the water in the glass, but the steam we got glimpses of before it faded in front of our eyes. So what I'm trying to say is that there's an aspect to the being that is forever unknown, and there's an aspect to the being where it is forever known, like its only intention is to see. As if your eyes have opened and you have eyes to see the world. You have hands to hold the world. And so there must come the greatest engagement, an engagement of eons, where all the souls of a universal sector awaken to the solar field. They awaken to how, in some sense, the world is alive through them. We have another unique scholar by the name of Terence McKenna, a man who I don't agree with everything he says, but he does say some good things. He says language, a culture or a society evolves as fast as its language does. So when we understand the important position of language in our lives, when we understand a lot of people's kind of emotional fluctuations are due to the language of their experience changing, you have two things. Either reality will become more complex or it will become more simple. Or as it tends to, it will dance between the both. That means there will be moments where you will feel the world is moving faster than you. There will be moments where you will feel the world is moving slower than you. Similarly, there will be moments where you will feel language is moving at high speeds in your mind. There will be moments where you feel like it's not, there's nothing there. And so what this all seems to say is that we cannot record a changing state of being, which is the unknown. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, it's a hard thing for me to say, but there's 8 billion of us here on a rock in the middle of nowhere, and just like how we sparked fire, we have also sparked everything else into meaning. Okay, and eventually we're going to see the hollowness of the linguistic realm, but it's not going to be completely hollow because there's an experiencer here. And so the nature of the experiencer is very different than the nature of how an object is understood. That means when you look at an object, okay, sure, you make a technology, you in some sense find a microscope or something, what was that thing called in CERN? The Hadron Collider, and you kind of break through the particles to find the deeper dimensions of it. But thoughts, you can't put a thought under a microscope. So in some sense, thought has to be reversed engineered, as if external reality is best discovered through engineering. You in some sense build with it, alongside it. You move with the nature of the world, but internally, it is different. It is a sort of letting go, as if behind your eyes you're a mind, in front of your eyes you're a body. Okay, and so behind your mind there's not the troubles of the body, but in front of your eyes there's not the troubles of the mind. And again, this goes to a very deep, not very deep, but I should say it like this because I'm trying to revoke the School of Athens 2.0. It's very strange. It's very strange. Everything changes in this life except the awareness of change. It's as if on an existential level, the energetic existence is it doesn't die, like energy cannot be created or destroyed, so it seems like there's this unique kind of observer in the background of just the individual's reality, where it's as if, how can I tell you, this is what I personally experience, what happens once you move beyond the conscious domains of your personality. Your conscious personality suddenly finds itself in a room of a sort of hall of mirrors kind of situation. So what that means is most people I consider, they don't need to know too much. It's as if most people on this planet they're trying to just follow the program and make sure they follow it right. For them, it's not of an interest to wonder about the structure of the whole thing. They never, it's very rare, I find, that human beings who wonder about the whole system. They may wonder about a part of the system, but to wonder about the whole system means to doubt the foundations of how the civilization was built. But only to do that, one must be pushed there. And so, all civilizations in existence, they have a sort of backup system. This backup system is when there is such inefficiency, and as this incredible amount of inefficiency is harbored, eventually it will reach a breaking point. So what that means is, imagine nobody, society and civilization didn't care at all for human beings. As if our societies, they didn't care for human beings. The only way they saw human beings is that they are going to be robots. So it's as if you're going to see society's going to be extremely nice in inviting people to transition from biological existence into a technological one. But that is, I don't know. I don't know if I'll be here that long in this room of elements. But I want you to imagine if there was a box on your head, but this box looked exactly like the world. So in some sense, how does one take off an invisible box? How does one shift the subjective fixation of the objective movement? You see, in front of me right now, there's a bottle. Okay, there's an object, but I call it a bottle. Okay? Now, the subjective imprint, nation reigns more supreme. When worlds replace words, reality will remain supreme. Think of it this way: these 8 billion people that are on this earth, there are 8 billion moments of attention. There are unique packets of, let's say, packages of energy, energetic existence, and expression. And these packages of expression are eventually, it's like, where is the energy of the attention going? In what way is your attention pulling the energy of your being? Or should I say the presence of your being? There's I've written this science fiction novel called The Messenger of Giants. And there's a scene, because it's science fiction, it's set in the year 5025. And in the year 5025, like, I can't explain the universe that this character finds himself, but the main character is just walking in the streets of New York in the year 5025, and New York has become like a sacred place. From the filth of Wall Street, it has transformed into like the holiest place where all the kind of religious establishments and their renditions are all there. So, anyways, this guy's going, and in this science fiction novel I have, human beings are in the year 5025 have attained a sort of enlightened elevation. So what, like, how would I say it? It's like robots are like human beings are acting like the angels for robots. Like robots can't see human beings; they're in their own realm, kind of following human patterns. But very rare, it's very rare that certain robots or extremely billionaire kind of robots can see like human beings. So as the story goes, this human main character is walking, and suddenly this golden Porsche pulls in front of him. And so this golden Porsche pulls in front of him. A robot gets out, a robot which has a kind of like is wearing a CEO suit, and it's like he gets out of the golden Porsche, and it's kind of to represent like the kind of the ego of the billionaire stature or whatever. I don't know how to say it. And so what happens is this robot goes to the main character, and the main character is this unique character who, in some sense, he doesn't. It's like he has no karma. His karma is strange. He's like this enlightened fellow. Anyway, so what happens is that the robot, which his name is Astros, and the main character, whose name is Rasoul, they, in some sense, the robot comes to Rasoul, and everybody in the book, for like just something I decided as a writer, acknowledges Rasoul as the wise one. So this robot goes there and says, "Wise one, please tell me," like something like to the point of what is the purpose of life aside following the program. And so, what is the purpose of robotic existence? As if imagine a robot asking a human being, "What is the purpose of existence?" And so Rasul kind of looks at the robot and tells them that in the story there's a very unique acknowledgement of soul and whatnot. But Rasul gives some kind of strange answer to this robot and says something to a point where robots should learn from kind of like their creators, human beings, and they should mimic their behavior until they for themselves can create such a thing. You know, it's as if the robot lives with the human to such a degree, with certain like human ideals, that eventually the robot, even though it doesn't have a soul, is behaving like one, therefore experiencing a sort of soulhood, pattern of soulhood, you know? But anyways, pretty much what happens is Rasul, what he says to the robot, um, how would I tell you? There, I don't. To be honest, I don't remember exactly. I wrote this like like 2 years ago or something. But pretty much the whole notion. The reason I was sharing that with you is that it's like when the question comes of how they how the intelligent being should kind of function, it must see its great. It kind of looks at its greatest possibilities, the greatest opportunities that are there, and in some sense, through an acknowledgement of. Um, The multidimensional moves to the singular. We're starting from a multidimensional kind of position. We feel we are bodies with minds. We may feel that we are minds that are souls, and we may feel we are souls that are unknown. Knowledge has been staring at the unknown mirror ever since the eyes have opened. There's this Zen story, and this Zen story, this man this kind of like young guy who's like interested in finding out what enlightenment is, there's a Zen sage, like an enlightened person, like at the edge of town. He goes and eventually gets to the place of that enlightened person, and he sees an old man, very graceful, simple man, just sitting by the porch in some sort of meditative pose, you know? And so the kid walks up there and instantly starts talking and says, "Hello, sir, I'm this guy, da 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 da, and I'm here. I've heard you have secret knowledge and wisdom, and you've experienced the ultimate. Please tell me, please spill the beans, so my journey wasn't a waste." And the kid hears no response. And so for some time, the kid constantly hangs around. It's as if months go by, and the kid keeps attempting every day to ask the guy and sees the guy doesn't talk. But the guy's there, the guy's chilling, he does like his normal stuff, but he sits on the porch mainly and he doesn't talk. Eventually, this kid gets fed up. He says, "What is this? I've been here so long. I've been trying to ask you for the secret truth. Why don't you share? Why don't you say anything?" And the kid gets angry and he leaves. Like he's rude and he leaves. He's on his way, the kid kind of going back to town, and suddenly he gets this feeling. This feeling deep down, like, oh shit, I should go back. And he goes back as if he's being intuitively, it's as if his moment knows where he should be, but his mind does not. And so what happens is his intuition leads him back, and as he goes back, the Zen story is very powerful because it's like what the sage, that guy, enlightened guy, suddenly says his first words to this guy, to this young guy. And what happens is they say this young man attains enlightenment in that moment. And so the young man's going back, and he's kind of giving up. He's like, okay, forget asking him. Let's just see. Eventually, he may say something. So something like that. The kid's conceptualizing. Eventually, he goes back, and he sees the guy in the porch, kind of smiling and looking at the kid and saying, "Why this ceaseless coming and going?" And then there's a silence. And this kid suddenly, it's as if that sentence opens up a new dimension in his mind. And he suddenly realizes, why this ceaseless coming and going? That means subjective realities change so often that any sort of desire will be an unconscious spiral. How we treat our intelligence, I believe, has to do with how much we're aware of it. And we have objective evidence of our intelligence, and we have a sort of subjective consideration of our intelligence, and we also have this sort of kind of primal awareness that is just how the moment is being. And so there is a uniqueness here. There is too much design for the world to be an empty place, for human beings to be the only things here. Like, come on. Human beings don't even know how the human is being here. We claim stories, yet none of us were there to see it. The birth of a species, the evolution of a species. On the surface of a rock, a creature opened its eyes. As it opened its eyes, it experienced life as the world. Eventually, the eyes managed to isolate themselves. The moment there was an awareness of the I am, there was an awareness in this evolutionary creature, as if consciousness was being noticed by this kind of position of nature. As consciousness was contemplated, the subjective evolution, to be more precise, was the moment where the person became a sort of, not a thought, but became contained, as if the attention began belonging to a subject. The objective attention began belonging to a subject. Eventually, it belonged to subject to such a degree, and the technology of language opened our ability to communicate the inner reality with the external to such a degree that we began to forget how matter and consciousness are simultaneous. We became convinced we're just material creatures, and we became convinced that in some sense the subjects upon these objective, the subject of our objective existence is superior to the object. So what I'm trying to tell you is the way the mind has been contemplated is the word communication. It has various meanings for me. Communication, a remembrance can be a sort of communication as well, you know? But it's a communication of kind of certain recorded data from your unconscious subconsciously to you. Your personality is the veil of thought. Your presence is that which cuts it, that which is beyond it. For me, it took me a while, to be honest, but I finally figured out. I was like, what is the purpose of human intelligence? That's a totally different question than what is the purpose of human beings, because then an objective dimension's added. But when you say what is the purpose of human intelligence, you're wondering all the subjects kind of dwindling and passing through people's minds. Where is it all leading? What is this great kind of force that is drawing us into the edge of time, as Terence McKenna would say? If time was a mirror, Terence McKenna has the saying where he has this talk called the Transcendental Object at the Edge of Time. I think I'm saying it wrong. But anyway, I'm not going to get into it too much, but there's this notion that, you see, we think of evolution as a sort of push, a push from the dirt into kind of reality, you know? But in some sense, the not only just the religious, but the kind of uncommon mentality finds the world to be pulled towards something. And so people in nature, before science was here, they had to have some way of acknowledging reality. So they were like, okay, so some person created it, and in some sense, that's why everything is here. Like how else could they approach it? You know, they had a sort of, they had to. It's like just like how we see a cell replicate itself to become a greater cell. Similarly, um, the self was reflected into external reality, and it was acknowledged in a certain way. It's very unique. Like right now, I could tell you the word philosophy, but what that word means to you has more to do with how you are seeing yourself in objective reality. It's as if it's very fascinating. Light enters our eyes. Then, when we look at an object, do you see? It's as if, how would I say this to you? It's as if the object reflects subjectively. It's as if a light beam enters our eyes, we see the world, then our attention enters a sort of object and we see a subject there. And it's very simple, guys. If there's a chance that the unknown, which it obviously is, but if it is more than 50%, Knowledge doesn't exist. It's kind of like what Socrates said: the only true wisdom is to know that you know nothing. He didn't mean he didn't know nothing. Socrates was a man who knew a lot. But when he said the only true wisdom is to know you know nothing, is because the more you see, the bigger the forest becomes. So the more you feel you know, the more unknown possibilities there are. You know, and that's how the ego finds itself. That's why it has the illusion of free will for the ego. Okay, I'm not saying free will is an illusion. Scientifically, we're kind of pushed towards that direction because we're atoms, we're electrons somehow being minds. So I guess the simplest way we contemplate is by saying it's a hallucination of nature, you know. You kiss the world with ever-present lips. Sight is being contained in thoughts that cannot be seen. And therefore the purpose of sensory data, because subjective data is here, is subjectivity. The purpose of subjectivity is objectivity. It's kind of like they're two sides of the same coin. They're the two, kind of similar to how the two hemispheres of the brain are one brain. The thought of the being and the body of the being are being the same moment, kind of like a vertical dimension and a horizontal dimension intersecting at one common point of kind of four identities emerge when there's two dimensions. What that means is there's, in some sense, two dualities are intersecting. That means two universal axes are intersecting. As if there is the individual line. Imagine, let's say the vertical dimension is the dimension for individual consciousness, and let's say the horizontal dimension is it is the line for the collective consciousness. And as these two lines are intersecting at that point, that one point finds that it can, in some sense, be, how would I say it? It can be a temporary individual or an eternal individual, or it can be, in some sense, a temporary collective being, or in some sense, an eternal collective being. It's like, you can say energy is like water, and reality is, in some sense, the cup where this water is being poured in. Eventually, as the water pours in beyond the cup's boundaries, there comes a surplus. Suddenly, once clarity is attained, ignorance perishes. This means that the mystical dimension opens up, but it opens up without a story. And that's true, I believe that's true spirituality. It is a storyless kind of abidance by the flow of your experience through the existence of nature. You know, surfers ride ocean waves. Mystics ride, in some sense, unknown waves of intelligence of a sort of field like nature. The world is alive, ladies and gentlemen. This is the best thing I can tell you. It's alive. What does that mean? That doesn't mean that there's a kind of, you know, Big Daddy in the sky watching everything. It means that there's a sort of intelligence here. This intelligence, objectively to us, is communicated as the laws of the universe. Subjectively, our imagination can entertain many notions. The scientific endeavor is for human beings on the surface of this planet to respect objectivity and to not get too caught in subjectivity. However, However, the religious and the spiritual or the philosophical or the poetic mind or the artistic mind, they are in some sense initiatives in the knowledge of mankind, where the field simply exists because the unknown can be reinterpreted. That's it. So now to get to the core of this talk, what is language's role in the evolution of nature? Let's say, what's the point of language? Why do we as creatures speak? And I believe it's because the drops merge into a stream, the streams merge into a river, the river in some sense gets to a waterfall and transitions dimensions and eventually finds its way to the ocean. So trust me, the purpose of catapult, like it's taking you the wrong direction but throwing you somewhere else. To be conscious of language is, to be honest, the epitome of mysticism. To recalibrate your relationship by prioritizing how the experience is being and then any sort of projection of a future doership. Once you respect the technology and go steady and study it, you will learn it. It's like, think of it this way, like if you can drive, there was a moment you couldn't. But as you went through the journey of learning how to do it, eventually there were enough memories for the skill to exist, for the talent to emerge. I said often in these talks, there was idol worship back in the day, and people were worshiping objects. This was suddenly stopped through some sort of insight of certain prophetic behavior. As this was stopped, people moved on to worshiping the next thing, and it was to worship subjects. And we are right now in an evolutionary point in regards to language where the species is in this kind of mass frenzy of ideal worship. People are realizing they're temporary beings. They're trying to figure out what the meaning of life is. They only subjectively engage it, eventually get pulled into the vacuum of a certain ideology, and eventually that ideology defines them to such a degree where they never wonder about who else they could be. You see, it's about freedom, but freedom does, like, it's, for me, I thought this is ridiculous. We call it free will, but it's a paradox. Because the will is only existent in its decision, but the moment you make a decision, the freedom of the other options is no longer there. So a sort of free will is a sort of, for me, it's a kind of very mysterious notion, because in some sense, uh, there is an individualness, but this individualness, to be free, can be even more than its individual identity. So for me, this was the kind of question: is my free will nature's intelligence, or is it my intelligence? And what does it even mean to be me in a natural world? I realized the many stories I had put like blindfolds over my eyes. I recognized how much my behavior was sabotaged by my beliefs, how much my true ability throughout the day, throughout my life, was sabotaged by my beliefs, by the way I thought subjectively the world has to be. The world is freer than our thoughts. It is so free that it has made chains. For me, the edge of the most extreme chaotic behavior is a suggestion of the other side. It is a suggestion that, oh my God, once you see a fool, then it's like humanity learns from fools. For me, like it's very kind of very funny, you know. Like sometimes there's a discussion on why kings had jesters, and some people say, okay, like the jester was the TV, but some people say the jester was there to share the humor of the public, and in doing so, kind of readjusting the mind of the king to the cultural value. You know, there's many ways this can be interpreted, but in some sense, how your attention moves suggests how the world treats you. Eventually, the person will feel that their control in life does not belong to a thought, yet a thought can be there. It's as if you don't live in your car, but your car is there. That means like when you drive your car, imagine like you suddenly forget you're in a car and you think you as a being are the whole car. Eventually you realize no, there's something deeper here. So similarly, people are looking at the objective existence, they're noticing there's a sort of subjectivity afloat. This subjectivity is hovering at its the best way we can describe in a sort of attributeless awareness, a sort of presence of attention prior to how the personality storified everything it saw, storified the sensory data. So for me, language is going to eventually become a mirror, and it's going to be a mirror where you can use language to share your inner reality with others, but you can also use language to share your inner reality with various states of your consciousness. So what that means is, for example, I've written a sentence one night, and then years later I read, suddenly my eyes came back to that sentence, and when I saw that sentence, it was, how can I tell you, it was as if the language of the past had become a mirror for the future to look at itself. So therefore we treat knowledge as a sort of catalyst towards a sort of actual greater knowing, something that in some sense it's like, what is the greatest thing, what's the in some sense what does the knower evolve to the unknower, to a being who in some sense must let go of who they are now to be who they truly are meant to be. You know, as Lao Tzu, this is Chinese philosophy, guys. Lao Tzu was a kind of badass. Like he was like a very graceful, simple man, but in his wisdom echoed the secrets of the Tao. That the Tao was not something that could be spoken about, and that which would, it's like, so how can I tell you, there I know that there will be definitely certain audience members who are going to hear certain concepts I'm going to speak, and they're going to feel it is forbidden, and therefore they're going to bring their cultural kind of angst towards me. But I'll tell you this world is more than a play. It is more than a play of forms. It is the intention of a universal sector to be alive, and no ideology can contain the world. Do you hear me, human beings of Earth? You know, in some sense, no concept can contain this. Therefore, thoughts are just reflections of our experiences and patterns that many can acknowledge as the same. I've said that language is the skin of the ego. I've said that the ego is in some sense the thought of I, the I thought, the self. The self, it is being given color to or animated by one, the environment. Trust me, your environment is a part of your personality whether you like it or not. It's affecting you on so many levels you don't even understand. Like the environment is definitely influencing character. But at the same time, when I say environment, it could even be the temperature, the hunger, but various factors involved there, you know? But then there is the subjective acknowledgement of the objective environment. And then there's the authorization or permission. It's like you don't understand. Freedom is something that, because most people feel they don't deserve, their minds never open up. It's like somebody who you ask them, are you creative? And the guy says, no, I'm not. And you're like, why? And he's like, no, I don't know. I've never thought to be creative or something. And suddenly, it's as if you share this view with the person that it all has to do with how much you value what is happening for you. Trust me, greatness will find you when it becomes important what is in front of you. And you, in some sense, uh, your free will exists in the purpose of the other, in some sense. It's kind of like a sort of similar conclusion that Swami Vivekananda, this kind of wise man, he said, only those who live for others only truly live. As if the individual exists for the collective exists for the individual, a symbiosis of various dimensions of the same organism, in some sense, re-emerging as the modernity rise. And I believe the first thing is, what the fuck? Like, they're gonna look they're going to look at the world and they're going to see many flaws. Now, these flaws will either overpower them, so they will live hopelessly and feel like they can't do anything about it, so they'll kind of lead towards hedonism, or they will kind of look at the chaos to a point where they will either fight it or they will create a new dimension. To create a new dimension is the safest bet. When I say to create a new dimension, it's as if like there's a sort of system. Imagine there's a certain way a company is doing something, you know, and this way that the company is doing something, it's inefficient. So instead, the person goes and starts another company and tries to, in some sense, rather than change the past, let the past, which is just so savagely following the program, just let it follow the program, just create enough space for a new dimension of possibility, as if similar to how a person simulates something before they create it. The simulation is a suggestion of how it could be in another dimension. I want human beings to understand that the value of a sort of network of communication where the greatest ideas on the planet find the global stage. We have to, in some sense, create a sort of global community. This global community, the internet is unfortunately, it leads us astray from that outcome. It gives freedom to all knowledge. Like, it kind of gives you access to many things that you wouldn't have if you had to travel around the world to find out, but in some sense, what I'm saying is that, guys, it's strange. Like, I was on the subway and I remember it was a very fascinating moment. I was like, wow. For a second, I was like, wow, what is all this? You know? And I suddenly realized, like, it's as if I entertain the notion of evolution, monkeys are, in some sense, evolved monkeys or chimpanzees are, in some sense, wearing clothing, sitting in like a subway, like in a giant metal capsule, moving at a fast speed. So I kind of noticed that, just like how human beings made the clothes that they wear, they have made the technologies that they have that they use, and at the same time, they have made the thoughts that they believe in. The issue is, it's not that uh, the issue is not that certain data is man-made or not. Everything we can say is man-made, and we can say prior to man there was something here before it was named. The stillness and silence within that transform all that is without you. All that is external reemerges as a new sort of way of being. You suddenly stop being just the body in your moment of being. You stop being just the thoughts. You suddenly abide as the whole moment. So right now, as I'm speaking to you, there's a part of this, like how I'm being alive right now is that I'm not just my body in this moment. I'm being the whole moment. That means the sensory data is endless. I can't identify with bits of it. This doesn't mean there's a sort of ignorance to the individuality. It just means that kind of like how Osho says, when you pick a flower, you kill its beauty. Like you disconnect it from how it's naturally being there. And similarly, I have just chosen to stop constantly boxing my experience in various thought structures. And in doing so, I've kind of noticed it's like as if a sort of silence and stillness, as if the mind was a pond, the ripples on this pond settle, and then there's a sort of reflection of the true being. Words are just fingers that are pointing to the truth. It's as if we are perceptive creatures, and Aldous Huxley has this quote where he says there are things known and things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. Your personality, believe it or not, because it requires a story, exists through language. Your presence exists not only as your objective, again, your objective form, but how your personality also belongs. Not belongs, but it's like the moment is cut up into pieces, and all these pieces suddenly return to one moment, and you experience a sort of uh, completions of eons of bewildered conception. You can let go of the animalistic nature by trusting the world. It is only trust that has evolved us. Without trust, we would still be wild beasts. We trusted the movement of nature. We trusted how our ancestors stood for something. We trusted the world we are in now. And we engage it. We move. Watch, then move. Pretty much, this is the only, like the best instruction. Watch, see how things occur, and then function. And as your eyes free the world from your subjective kind of landscape, beauty arises. Like how the poet Rumi says, be living poetry. So you no longer are seeking poetry, it's as if every moment has a sort of majestic beauty of how it's occurring. The Lotus Sutra tells us keep your mind alive and free without abiding in anywhere or anything. Zen Master Dogen tells us to follow Buddha's path, study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. And once we awaken to the nature of all things, we will not be overpowered by, in some sense, sleep. We will care for the world. It's like because we're like living beings. It's not, regardless of how much you hate life or you feel like it's kind of been cruel to you, your design is existential. So you cannot hate what exists. You know, and if you do, the burden of the thought is there. That means you're too much of a thought stuck in a certain story to see otherwise. Rabindranath Tagore says, "You cannot cross the sea by merely staring at it." And in some sense, Mr. Within will say, you cannot evolve into the greater experience of nature until the language of existence shifts. May clarity be reborn, for the unknown can never die. Much blessings and namaste.